Welcome to the Mayoral podcast, where we sit down with mayors from across the state to break down how local government really works and explore the many ways young people can shape their communities. I'm your host, Aayan Hanif, and today I'm excited to be joined by Mayor Wilk of the city of Walnut Creek. Mayor Wilk, thank you so much for being here. I'd love if you could just introduce yourself for anyone tuning in who may not know you.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Aon. So I'm Kevin Wilk. This is my second term as mayor of Walnut Creek. I was first elected in 2016, and like many of the smaller cities in California of under 100,000, we have a directly elected city council, but then the mayor is elected from the city council. So, and we're in a rotation. So I was first selected as mayor in 2021. This is my second term now in 2026. I ran for re-election in 2020 and 2024, so I'm in the middle of my third term. And it's interesting because there are some of those cities, not every city is elects their mayor from within the council. There are some directly elected mayors that are come from smaller cities, but a lot of people don't know that. A lot of people that are voters and residents in cities have no idea how their mayor is elected. They may think they elect them directly and just don't realize. So it's interesting.
That's super interesting. I also wanted to touch specifically on that. I know there's a lot of cities nearby, like Danville, Mountain View, also follow like council manager systems. So I was just wondering, what's the difference between being just like a regular council member and a mayor, specifically in Walnut Creek?
Yeah. So and even a city manager council system can still have a directly elected mayor, which actually is the case in most of the state. So the difference between my responsibilities as mayor versus being on the council and not as mayor, because we're all on the council. There's 5 council members, 1 is mayor, and really are 3 prime areas. The first is that a mayor will set the agenda for a city council meeting with the city manager. The second is that the mayor will run the meeting, run the city council meeting. And the third is that we're the person that the media will come to and ask questions. It could be about anything from development or a crime or really anything at all. The mayor is the one that answers on behalf of the city. So those 3 areas, of course, there's ribbon cutting and those kind of things, but really any council member, anybody could be invited to a ribbon cutting and can speak on behalf of a new opening of a business, for example, or just even add a business. But those 3 areas I mentioned, those are the prime areas that are differentiators between a council member that is a mayor versus one that's not.
Right. Beyond just like the difference between like the council members, I know you mentioned like your interactions with the managers. Like, what are the like certain things that you can do that the manager doesn't, and vice versa? Like, what are the things the manager does that you don't?
So the city manager, think of it like a CEO of a company. The city manager is a CEO that is in charge of the organization. The organization, in this case, being the city employees and the city itself. So we have let's say about 300 employees. They all roll up to the city manager. Those are different department heads. And of course, every department head has people in those departments that roll up to them. So for example, police chief, the director of planning and community development, director of public works, director of human resources, director of arts and recreation. They all have staffs and people that are under them, and they roll up to the city manager. The city manager then reports to the city council. So the city council in this instance is like a board of supervisors. The board of supervisors don't directly run the employees and run the city. They provide the vision that the city manager, in this case, or the CEO, then implements that vision based upon this city council. So that is how we work with the city manager. And actually, like many cities, only the city manager and the city attorney report directly to the city council. All the other employees, including police chief, report to the city manager. So that's one big difference in how that works. So if there is a problem within any of those departments, and that could be, a pothole in a road, it could be a program in the arts department, it could be an issue that happened on the police force, or one that is happening like right now, for example, we're dealing with a water main break, and that will go up to public works. So the city manager will work directly with those staffs. And that would also include reviews, any kind of promotions, or any kind of any kind of issues where we are also maybe need to hold somebody accountable. That's the city manager. It would be improper for a council member to speak directly to a staff member and give them direction on what to do. Just wouldn't happen. Uh, and then the city manager, unless directed, wouldn't necessarily speak to the media on anything that is a political issue. So when we're talking about certain kinds of vision of what we might be looking at for a ballot measure, as an example, or city council members, if there's a city council race, the city manager would not be appropriate to speak on that issue.
That's interesting. I wanted to touch on like that thing you mentioned about a vision and even like politics a little bit. I know officially in California for states that have like mayors on the ballot, you're not allowed to show a party. And there's this famous saying that like there's no Democratic or Republican way to fix the pothole. But
Right.
I'm just wondering, how do you think that like partisanship and like parties interact with your job in local government?
Well, the local parties do try to interact by attempting to influence certain areas that are important to them. For example, one might be sustainability, one might be crime and safety, another one might be how how we even run our elections, whether we're at large or by a district. So they can have influence in that, and they would meet with specific council members. And of course, I meet with all sorts of different groups and the two political groups would be, let's say, on the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. And so they would have their interests. And I take the interests into account because so many times they do align across very similar issues. Nobody wants crime in their city. That is a nonpartisan issue. Everybody wants good roads. Everybody wants to understand more development. There may be some issues like taxes, where we implemented a half-cent sales tax a few years ago to help pay for new swimming facilities and some new police officers to be hired. And there may be one interest in a group that is not interested in paying any more taxes. And so they're trying to influence that. The other one says, no, 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 this makes sense. We can pay half-cent more sales tax for that. So there can be that kind of discussion. And we just have to balance everything. And that's what I do. I stay on nonpartisan, apolitical issues that we can try to come to agreement on and just through a common sense approach be able to push forward an ordinance or a vision that we're pushing forward to the people.
Great. Now I wanted to go into a little bit more about your own journey. I was just wondering, how did you first become involved in public service? How did that eventually lead to you becoming the mayor? Was this like something you always envisioned yourself doing or something that kind of just like came along the way?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been interested in politics to a certain extent. I was a political science major at UCLA. Uh, but really, that was the last. In fact, I did intern for a congressman way back then, but I really wasn't involved specifically in politics. And then when we moved into the area in Walnut Creek, I became involved in commissions, which are appointed positions. It's a volunteer, but first it was an arts commission, then it was a transportation commission. But I had had a whole career in internet marketing, and I had a couple of my own businesses. I'd lived around the world in 4 different countries. Eventually, when I did come back to this area, I figured if I'm going to live here, I wanted to really be more involved in the city and what goes on. And so, really, it was just a matter of interest. Arts Commission approved public art. Transportation Commission approved some of the projects that are happening in transportation. I found that really very interesting. So I did that while doing everything else and working and raising my family and being a coach for my kids' soccer and basketball teams. And then when an opportunity came up to run for council in 2016, and it's not even that the opportunity came up, there were 3 seats that were up, but all of the 3 incumbents were running for those 3 seats. So I had to take on all 3 incumbents. That's something that typically hadn't been done in Walnut Creek in 25 years, that an incumbent had lost a seat that they ran for. So I just felt that there was some division going on within the city council. There were some views I wanted to put forward that involved sustainability and climate action and some different things that the city council just hadn't taken up. So I decided to run. I didn't think I would necessarily win at all, but I gave it my best effort. And when I did that, I did end up getting the most votes. So I did end up getting on city council. And so it wasn't something that I had been pushing forward for years and years, but certainly in the year leading up to the city council race, I decided, okay, let's give this an effort. And then uh, there's that rotation of getting into mayor. So you're basically fifth on in line, and then as you get closer, then you're mayor pro tem, which it was like a vice mayor the year before. And in our instance, I had to run again for re-election. And when I won that time in 2020, I became mayor the next year. So that's how it all ended up. It was a very long and winding road. Definitely not a straight path. And there are some people that have this idea in mind from the beginning, and they're using everything they do to, whether it's running for local office or maybe even using it as stepping stone for higher office. But I just went with the flow, and when an opportunity came up, I took it.
It's interesting. I wanted to like specifically go on the thing you last mentioned about higher offices. I know there's a lot of specifically recently with the governor election, we saw a lot of former mayors actually run for that position. Do you have any aspirations of going up to either like state government or even federal government?
Yeah, well, there's always an interest, I think, in looking at what can I do as a state representative? What can I do as a congressman? I mean, there's all these aspects. And I really do believe that people that are most effective in many cases, they do come from where they're really working directly with constituents. So coming from a local office. People, of course, run for U.S. senator or congressman with no other experience at all. And sometimes they do win. And I do wonder how involved are they then with their constituents, and with what they've campaigned on, are they basically holding their office with those standards that they ran on? I mean, it's a question that I often ask if somebody runs for the first time. So for my own personal interests. I have 2 more years in my term. I guess never say never, but that's not what I'm looking at. And I've been asked about running for higher office for a variety of different things, and that's truly a game changer because you're doing something that now is essentially on a volunteer basis. We're paid a small stipend, but I might work 20, 30 hours a week or 40 hours and I make my own time on that. But if you're a state assembly member, state senator, congress member, you are working 80 hours a week. You're going to Sacramento every day, or you're going to Washington D.C. every week, and it changes everything. I will say I went to a U.S. conference of mayors in January. I met hundreds of mayors from across the U.S., big cities and small cities, and the one resonating factor that came out of every single person I spoke with, from big cities to small, is that the best job they ever had was mayor. And these are people that sometimes had been state assembly members, sometimes Congress members, sometimes county supervisors. They all said mayor was the best job they ever had. Thought that was interesting.
Awesome. Yeah. I also, upon doing some research on you, I noticed that you've also worked at some major technology companies like Microsoft and Yahoo. I know typically like this type of sector is known for like moving fast and breaking things and just like going and trying everything. And on the flip side, local governments typically known to be a little more slower and like thought out and thorough. So I was just wondering, like, how do these two different like employments like compare to each other? Is there any lessons that you learned in your former jobs that you like to carry forward?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting observation because when you're working with a technology company like that, something new will come out and you're immediately going to market with it. And I was in the marketing arena. So in that instance, we're, let's say we're convincing companies or talking to them about using product A, but now we're going to talk about product B and completely shift. And we're moving very quickly to do that. But in government, I think at the local level, things can move a little faster. So, for example, when I came my first year, I did come from these internet companies, and I said, "Well, how does Walnut Creek not have free Wi-Fi?" It just seems like we, as really the center of commerce when it comes to Contra Costa County, we should have free Wi-Fi. And so we pushed toward that, and we had it done within, I think, probably within 6 or 7 months. We had free Wi-Fi, and now anybody can use that. Or when it came to raising the pride flag, I was able to get that done. That took a little bit longer, maybe 8 months or so, but I was able to get people together and get a coalition together, and we were able to do that for our residents. Whether it's banning flavored vapes or um, being able to uh, have different areas with more crosswalks and better safety for pedestrians. these have to go through a budgeting process. So it may not be the kind of thing where, hey, I want to do this and we're doing it tomorrow, but we got it done within a year. And sometimes if you're looking at federal or state government, it might take longer than that. So I do feel that the background that I had and the marketing experience that I had, I was able to push through a little faster than maybe it would have happened otherwise.
Seems like you've obviously had a very successful career so far as mayor and done a lot of like incredible things for the city. But I also wanted to ask more personally, like, what was one of the biggest challenges you faced? And how did you overcome that throughout your journey?
Well, I mean, I guess I would say that there were two. The first was COVID, which as first as mayor pro tem and then as mayor, we were dealing with issues where we had to close businesses and there was a lot of pushback from businesses. We did open up outdoor dining very quickly, and that was something that we really set the standard for in the county. Probably the only sil- sil- silver silver lining that came out of COVID. So that was good, but we had to move on a dime. We were looking at a $3 million surplus as a city, and we went from that to about a $25 million deficit for the next year within about 3 weeks. I mean, that's how quickly that happened during COVID. So it was really a challenge in being able to do what we need to do and curtail some programs like arts and rec where we knew we had to do that. Work with businesses to try to get curbside delivery, or we had free parking for a while there just to allow people to come downtown and make it as easy as possible to shop and spend money. And of course, we needed tax revenues. So that was probably the most challenging as uh, as being an elected official trying to manage a city. Personally, the most challenging has been something I would have never expected to happen. And that is that there was this movement toward anti Semitism and attacking me personally while I was on the dais, the Jewish community in general. And uh, I mean, we had a Nazi and people that felt no problem coming into our city council chambers and attacking me and marginalized communities, LGBTQ, you name it, calling in on Zoom and doing the same thing, and me having to stand up for the community, and me standing and denouncing and really not letting them get away with whatever they wanted to say, because again, this goes towards all of our freedom. If somebody is picking on one marginalized community, it's not like they think all communities are then fine. They tend to. If a hater in one group is going to hate in other groups. And so I think it's important to stand up for all groups, which I have always done. And to that point, I then organized a panel at our California League of Cities annual conference. We then had with several different members of different minority communities, and we had a very successful panel in front of hundreds of mayors and council members from across the state, talking about what we need to do to stand up for each other. All of us stand up collectively against hate, that we as elected officials need to do that and not just stay within our own silos of our communities. And so I think that's really important. And then taking it a step further, another session that I led at multiple conferences is, okay, if hate does appear in your council chambers, what's an outline of how to handle that? Do you sit silently by and let it just happen, or do you take an active approach against it? There's not that there's any one size fits all, but there's different discussion points that we were able to have about that. So that was a challenge. It continues to be a challenge, but that was one that I faced head on and appeared 5 feet from me, which I never would have expected.
That seems especially like prevalent today, and we see that all over the place. But I think it's really interesting how you actually took action. You mentioned with the other mayors across California. I wanted to talk a little bit more about that. Could you just tell us, like, a lot of people don't know that it seems like all the mayors meet together once a year.
Mhm.
Like, what does that kind of look like, and what usually comes out of that each year?
Yeah, so there are a couple of different conferences, but the big one is the annual California League of Cities conference. So sometimes it meets up here in Sacramento, sometimes it meets down in the LA area. We actually have one that's going to be in Anaheim in September. And you end up getting mayors and council members from 482 cities in California. City managers will sometimes come, potentially other city leaders, but it's a conference of about 2,000 2,500 people or so. And there's a variety of different sessions, everything from how to mitigate wildfire disasters. Obviously, we see that happening. Others might be how to enhance public safety. Others might be how to pass a tax measure. Other ones might be how to build housing in your city. It really runs the gamut. And you've got about I want to say there's something like 100 different sessions. There's the keynote sessions, and there's always big keynote speakers. There's 100 different sessions that we can all go to and sign up for based upon what your own city's needs are. So we'll often divide and conquer. I'll take this and that. My colleague might take a couple of other ones. But it's a great way to collaborate. You talk to your other council members in your region. I talk to other council members and mayors from other cities in California. I had the opportunity. Here's just one example of what came out of it. Went to one of these conferences, and this was not even the big conference. This was a smaller one that Sacramento has. Still same thing, but wasn't the annual one. And I met the mayor of Santa Monica. Uh, where they were dealing with an issue on housing. We had a similar issue. I was talking with her, and then the Palisades fire happened in Santa Monica 6 months later. And so I was following with her what she was doing. When I went down there, I talked with her and I had issues. We all live in a fire zone in California. So I wanted to see what they were doing, what they had prepared for, what they have to do now. And so I was able to meet with her, and she got me a private tour through the Palisades area that had just been burned a couple of months before. And having those kind of discussions, I would have never had that discussion except for the fact that I met her at a conference. Other kind of conferences that we have, we've talked about things like banning gas-powered leaf blowers. And I was talking about that on one of our California League of Cities calls, and one of these ones that we have maybe every quarter or so. And the mayor of Santa Barbara called me up, said, just want to be prepared that if you do that, now, I mean, it is happening in the state within the state law itself. But he said, if you do that and go it alone on that, here's what you can expect. Neighbors tattling on each other, taking up 911 calls to tell that so-and-so is using a gas-powered leaf blower. You turn neighbor against neighbor. And I thought this was interesting. I hadn't heard that perspective before. The mayor of Santa Barbara was dealing with the same issue and let me know. So those are the kind of things that can come out of those conferences.
Yeah, it's awesome. I also, now that we've come to understood how it is when mayors interact with one another, I wanted to move on specifically to what this podcast has always been about, which is the youth. And I was wondering, how do you, as like the head of the local government, like interact with youth and like get them involved as well?
Yeah, so a few different things that we do on that front. One of them is that we have a youth leadership commission that reports to the city council, has 15 youths that are either living in Walnut Creek, so they're teenagers, or they're going to high school here. And so, in fact, interviews just occurred in the last couple of days for our next round. Now, usually, if somebody is already on the commission, they can be on it for a second year. But we get people from their freshman year right through their senior year, and they're working on projects that help to benefit the city. So they hold monthly meetings, they have the minutes, they have a chair and a vice chair, just like we would on the city council. Out of that also comes something that's called a seat at the table. So three of our commissions, our Park Recreation Open Space Commission, Arts Commission, and Transportation Commission, all have somebody that is a teenager that has gone through the interview process from one of our high schools that sits on that commission and gives the youth perspective there. So that's all part of it. So those are some very proactive ways that we're taking care of that. We also are starting up an internship program. In fact, I had an intern who was on our youth commission, and she's going to be a senior at the local high school. And she was my intern for the summer. So she was able to meet different people in government, different people in business, the nonprofits, went with me to many different events. And I know another council member also has an intern that they works with as well. So we're going to try to formalize that a little bit moving forward. But those are some of the ways. There's also task forces. There's candidate campaigns that they're always looking for youths to help as well. I think one aspect that I would really like to be able to work more with youths are social media, because you and other youths are going to have access to a network in social media that I can't access and people in the city can't access. We need to be able to reach out with what messaging that we have to hit a demographic that may be 16 to 25. And so I think there's ways that we can continue to do this.
It's so inspiring to hear. I wanted to ask the last question, which what we end every single one of these episodes with. But What's one piece of advice you'd give to young people who want to make a positive impact on their community, whether or not they ever decide to run for office?
Sure. Well, the first thing I would always recommend is to sign up for your city's newsletter off the city website, whatever city that is, because there's always information of what's happening in the city. And what may be interesting for one person, and maybe it's climate change, somebody else might want to be more involved with with bike trails or hiking trails or e-bikes. There's all sorts of different things. So when they see something coming out or see that an event's going to happen, they can be assured that if they go to that event, they're going to meet the person in charge of it who's responsible for those kind of programs and get involved with that person. Next thing you know, they could be a volunteer. They could be somebody that could be an intern. Maybe they get a summer job on staff. So there's all sorts of things they can do, whatever their interest may be. There's just so many different possibilities. So that's on the city side. There's always task forces. There's always needs for volunteers. If somebody goes to a city and they go, oh my gosh, this city is so clean. How can I get that going in my own city? And then they see that there is a creek cleanup or a citywide cleanup day. They can get involved in that kind of a thing. And then, of course, there's always candidate campaigns every 2 years, whether it's for city council, for Congress, for assembly. There's always a need for volunteers on those kind of campaigns. And the great thing about that, because I've had interns when I've run for my campaigns, is they get to know the candidate, they get to know the issues, they can discuss the issues with them, they're able to internalize them, speak about them to their own peer groups, or even if they're going to other events and talking to people about that. And they can really feel vested in becoming part of the solution rather than just kind of wondering how are we going to solve this problem. They have direct access to who those candidates are and eventually elected officials. So I think all those ways, if there is an interest, go for it. There's going to be an opportunity.
All right. Thank you so much, Mayor Wilk, for taking your time with us. That concludes this episode of the Mayoral.